two things I'm gonna do in this debate. First, set up. Second, to our team's two arguments, which are how public can be more hopeful towards politics if under our side of the world, and how can public can change their aim and to be more rational when they're voting. So firstly, setup. We define career as it's a personal advancement and a personal pursuit of an individual. This means that they study for many years in order to get this career, and it's their pursue since a very young age. So they have the ability to do so. And comparatively, we define public services as those goods without developing a lot, which it's if which because we frame it as because it is a narrative debate, we have to focus on how politics can be viewed better, and how on our side where when those politics are seen as a career, it's more clear to public on how when they try to vote. So with this setup, then moving on to my first argument on how public can be more hopeful towards the politics. So I think when we define it as a career, public and when politicians are not fulfilling their job, public can report to the government directly. This is very advantage because it tracks and allow those politicians to do their jobs correct and ensure that their choices that they make on policies are informed. Comparatively, under opposition, where those if you characterize politics as public services, then people may needs to go through a lot of process, and they cannot report to the government directly because it needs to be because in order for this to be developed, everyone needs to agree, and there's like no direct report that they can applicate to those government. So in the worst case scenario, this leads people to protest because they think that public politics are only doing this for the sake of the public, but not actually committing towards this thing. They're just addressing it without actual commitments, which this hinges the politics in a country as a whole, as the purpose of those politics are not fulfilled fully. Moving on to my second argument, which is I think the most important argument coming from the proposition side, which is how votes can be more rational if politicians are seen as career-based. Because if it's career-based and it's publicized, this means that it's more likely for politicians to be viewed as their own own ability rather than emotional and empathies. So we think this means that when politicians are deciding a decisions, they're more likely to think of it as I did this to help my country compared to I did so this means that those politicians are much more trustworthy comparatively. Let's take an example of even when politicians are viewed as career-based and they're trying to do public goods, when those politicians, because they're viewed as career-based and when they do public goods, it's more because that's simply because it's rational and it's good for the country as a whole when they decided, compared to doing it because I want to sustain my position. So when we think because with this example, we think passion is very important because those politics are able to address their own ability and actually make rational decisions when they are doing so, compared to the opposition side, where in the best case, those politicians may even if those politicians are able to commit to the services, you cannot sustain in the long term that they will always be doing good for the society. Before I move on, yeah.
Don't you think that the framing of politics as a public service increases politician responsibility because now you know that the lives of millions of people are in your hands?
That's just exactly what I characterize. If you want to do good, to the community, you have to show that you are passionate and you're actually pursuing your career. Because when we view politicians, their responsibility is to create good policies and to create goods for the public, right? You have to be seen as passionate and someone who can fulfill your responsibility in order to achieve the benefits coming from your side. So that's why we want politicians to be viewed as a career based, because it shows their actual ability and moving so that's why we think comparatively our side is better. So the impact of this argument is simple, because when politicians which is how it help the country in a long term. So because politicians are viewed as career based, they're more likely to be seen as someone who commits to society compared to a lot of sensitive and emotions that driven them to make decisions. So that's why proud to propose.
Proposition cannot get away with characterizing public service workers as lazy people with no accountability and incentive to fulfill their role. When aspiring politicians view politics as something altruistic and something that helps the public, they disregard the limited scope of solely generating more profit as being a politician solely for the career and solely for the money you make. So proud to oppose. First, some layers of setup. What does politics equals social service look like? Basically, what's the narrative in our world? This would mean that politics is viewed as something that anyone can get themselves involved in. It's something that doesn't require fancy prerequisites and qualifications. Anyone can contribute to social service, and that's the narrative we would want to push. But secondly, what is the main metric of this debate? The team that wins this debate is the team that has the most democratic values integrated into politics. This would produce good politicians whose incentive is actively to help the public while viewing politics as a career does otherwise, but we'll prove that later in our arguments. Before moving on to our first two arguments, some responses. One of the main points coming from PM is that the public can be more helpful with their voting and whatnot because now they have a greater incentive to call out politicians for not properly fulfilling their job. We think this argument is untrue for OG. People would probably not protest a lot when politics is viewed as a career because they feel like they shouldn't get themselves involved in a supposed job that only professionals should be involved in. Or they think, who am I to talk back or criticize a professional when they probably have more experience and more knowledge about politics than me. When we characterize politics as something that anyone can get themselves involved in social service, that makes people feel like they actually have the duty and obligation in some ways to get themselves involved and to be able to participate and try to improve politics as a whole. More about this in my second argument. Therefore, we would say this actually works on our side. But also, she talked about how votes are more rational because politicians are now more genuine about their jobs now that money is on the line and now that it's a career and everything. This is entirely untrue. Note that when you make something career-based, you make politics into something entirely about profit and making money. This means that people start to want to become politicians, not because of their genuine interest in helping the public and wanting to be an altruistic person, wanting to help and improve the success of a country, which is a narrative on our world, but rather because they want to make money. The most successful politicians in history were often the ones with genuinity. Furthermore, politicians still have an interest to stay in power on our side because politicians is viewed as a public service and people are more engaged as a whole. Politicians still want to be elected again. You still have that factor of power, I guess, in these major political roles. PM never proves why this benefit is necessarily exclusive to a world where politicians are seen solely as workers and only in that world. For all these, so proud to oppose. Firstly, moving on to our first argument then about how our world aligns with democratic principles. The premise here is that democracy is built on the idea that elected officials actually represent the people. Viewing politics as a service reestablishes the same idea that the politicians serve as representatives of the citizens and the constituents, prioritizing their needs and their voices. Feudalism mechanism here then. If we frame politicians as those with roles of service, it promotes an approach to the governance, encouraging citizens to be engaged with the political atmosphere and bring out their diverse voices and perspectives, even as marginalized individuals. This hence aligns with under the democratic ideal of representing all voices, not just those with power and influence. I said chat POIs, but why is there an incentive for citizens to understand this and cooperate? Three primary reasons here. Firstly, a service-oriented mindset aligns with the democratic principle of working for the common betterment of society, and it prioritizes policies that actually focus on social welfare and address the collective needs over individual interests. Like if you're a politician and if you have that power, but if you feel that's only a career, then you would try to make things that somehow generate more profit for yourself. We would change this incentive here. We change the incentive of the main actors of this debate. But secondly, by emphasizing service, it encourages citizens to see themselves as active members of society rather than observers, which empowers their voices, and especially for marginalized communities, serves as a catalyst for them to voice out their opinions. But lastly, democratic systems with a narrative of service and obligation to citizens show that they have to be responsive to the citizens and show the important values of democracy. Before moving on, I'll take the POI. Okay, assuming none, I'll move on to argument 2 about improving civic engagement. Premise here is that framing political roles as public service can inspire more individuals to engage in politics, viewing it as a noble pursuit rather than a career solely for power or profit. This ensures that the public views politicians as that the public does not view politicians solely as an occupation. Three questions to ask here then. Firstly, what does this problem look like? We see that there's quite a bit of political apathy in a lot of democracies, especially among youth. They feel disengaged with politics, and they feel like since they have no relation themselves personally to what's going on up there in the government, they have no need to get themselves involved in it at all. Framing politics as a career only makes this worse. It pushes the narrative that only professionals can be involved in politics, or basically only if you went to law school or if you have experience in office and whatnot, only then can you play a major role in political and governmental systems. Essentially, you're pushing the narrative that this is their own world, this is their other game, you are not part of that. A parallel example could be doctors. Obviously, doctors are viewed as careers, which is why people have the general perception that only if you have a fancy degree in medical school can you become a professional doctor. That's why people don't get themselves involved in doctors and healthcare unless they're actively trying to get themselves in a high-paying job in that area. So to connect this back to politics, society thinks that because they don't have the prerequisites and qualifications to become politicians, they have no relation whatsoever to that field. They think that only professionals should be involved there since that it's a real career. But second question, why is this especially bad? What impacts are there? Political apathy, we'd say, is one of the worst things that could happen to a democratic country. The moment individuals feel like they're heavily disconnected from the government and are not involved, that is the moment where countries start falling apart. For example, we have like less public trust in the government. People feel like the government doesn't listen to them. They don't have an active voice. They don't have active power in what their government does. Civic disengagement can lead to things like low voter turnout. The impacts are pretty obvious. This means that there's minimal accurate representation of society since so many people are just disinterested from the get-go and therefore don't express their opinions and perspectives on some governmental policies. But thirdly, why does our side actually have solvency? Suppose that politics is framed as public service. Does public service require these prerequisites and experience and university degrees? Is public service limited to only a handful of the most elitist, educated, and rich individuals? No, anyone can get themselves involved in public service, and unlike how professional careers are viewed, there is no barrier as to who can be related to politics. This means that we improve civic engagement because status quo has a general narrative that politics is about social service. That's why in a lot of democracies, we at least have some voter turnout and interest in governmental regulations and laws. We would want to improve this benefit and maximize this benefit even more by advocating for a world where politics is pushed largely as a field of social service. For all these reasons, never been prouder to oppose.
Train politics as career simply means that we think that these politics are able to maximize, to fulfill the demand for all citizens. And therefore, we think it is our side role that bring more social discourse between the public and the politician. Proud to propose. In my speech today, first, some rebuttal engagement, 2.0. Secondly, elaborating on our arguments. Firstly, they say something like how on their side of the house, a politician will become more responsible due to the love for their citizens. But I think that there's just no incentive that's greater than personal interest, right? Because let's say that if you are in a company, the amount of salary that you can get or how likely you are going to get fired, it's far more important than what benefit I can bring by developing this what benefit I can bring to the society by developing this software or producing this I don't know, song, right? Because because getting fired is, or like how much salary they paid, directly linked to your quality of life. If you cannot make yourself live good, then there's no meaning in like your self interest is outweighs like others' interests much more. And we think that's exactly how the market functions are able to successfully, right? Because like the free market is just based on the based on the premise that people care about their own interest, and this own interest maximizes the demand supply and make everyone happy. This is the exact reason why capitalism outweighs communism in the South School. And we think that our side world that portray career as a that portray politics as a career are more likely to make people like care about their own interest and also voice out this interest when they feel like their demand isn't being fulfilled. Also, let's say if you're in a state-owned enterprise where you don't get fired, this also means that no matter what you do, you won't get fired and you can still live a good life. Therefore, we think that this also gives most politicians less incentive to work hard. Secondly, they talk about democracy. They say that, and somehow I just don't know why democracy is something that's exclusive to their side, because it's not like on our side where they will become dictator and like control all the resources and think of ways that can maximize the economy for the country, right? I don't think that's so. We tell you that, in fact, we think we're the one that's more democratic because public care more about politics. On your side of the house, people think like public think of politics as public good that can never be changed no matter what. For example, people are just always like, people have given hope on public good. People have given hope on New York subways or like private or like public bathroom or in all the infrastructures, because no matter what you say, like the country won't have incentive just to invest in those private infrastructures and to renew these subways, right? Therefore, we think that people on your side of the house, in fact, has less incentive to like voice them out because people just giving up on those infrastructure. Comparatively, it is our side where people know that if they don't do their job right, they can get fired or like they can get punished. Then people are more likely to voice their anger when the politician didn't do something that's good. Therefore, we think that on our side of the house, it is world in which people are more likely to care about politics and also more likely to voice themselves out, which we think is a core value of democracy, which we think that OO doesn't have. Now, move on to rebuilding our case. We think that one difference between as I already mentioned before, between public service and career is the likelihood of being replaced. On your side of the house, on our side of the house, career is something that's replaceable. I mean, if you don't do your job or if you don't fulfill your role, you can get replaced. But on your side of the house, public good is being viewed as something that's priceless when politicians do that only for the love of society. But this is bad because as our first speaker already told you, people in this case if people like are voting based on how passionate someone are towards society, then we think that they are more likely to vote for ones that have compassion, even if they don't have the actual skill, right? Where who doesn't have the actual skill or who doesn't have the incentive to promote and maximize a profit, right? We think this is bad because when you cannot bring benefit to this, when you cannot actually have the incentive or like have the urgency of or have the fear of being eliminated, you don't have much incentive to maximize the welfare for society. And we think this is bad because we tell you that people's life is contingent on how much profits the politician is able to generate or how much good or like the policies that these politicians passed. Therefore, we tell you that on our side of the house, when you have someone that's like desperately, when you have politicians that's desperate because they don't want to get fired or they don't want to be replaced, we think they're able to pass policies, they're able to like put more effort into the work or think of policy that generate more benefit instead of just like not doing anything after they get elected. Secondly, move on to how, and also elaborating on how our side will have more engagement to our public, to politics. But before that, is there any POIs? Seems no. Okay, we tell that as our first speaker already told you that there's apathetic. That's the public is now apathetic to our public goods, because people are because people think that it is no use complaining. For example, all the state-owned enterprises or all the infrastructure in which they will never change, even if people are advocating for it. Therefore, what happened is that people rely less on state-owned enterprises and choose to rely more on private entities or private goods, right? Therefore, we think that complaining and social discourse will be gone, will be significantly minimized on their side. But on our side, because people know because people will treat politics as a career. Therefore, they are more likely to feel anger if the politician didn't do their job right. If the politician didn't do what they're fulfilled to say, or the politician like do things that made their life worse. Therefore, we think that in this case, people are more likely to fight for their rights. For example, like to fight for the better quality of politician, to fight to like replace whichever politician that didn't do their job right. Therefore, we think that, or like even if say let's like they will not be replaced, we think that public are more likely to pressure that politician to do their job correctly. Therefore, we think in our side world we have more social discourse. Therefore, and we think that there are three benefits. Firstly, is that we're able to ensure democracy as all try to push for, and we think that we are the one that do better because we're the side that have more engagement. But secondly, is that we also pressure the politician to act more responsibility, because the only way we can get the trust of the citizens, or the only way in which we can like keep getting elected, is to bring positive society to the society, positive benefit to the society, instead of like acting like someone like, or like being someone who say, oh, I'll care about it, but instead only have care but cannot bring any benefit to the society, right? Therefore, I think on both sides, we are able to like have more social discourse and also have a more responsible politician who can do much more. For all the reasons above, proud to you.
If politicians view their pursuit in politics as a career, this leads to prioritizing personal gain over the genuine public service that should happen, shedding light on a culture of corruption and creating the skepticism among constituents that we don't want, proud to oppose. Directly moving on to rebels. First, they talk about how you have to show you're passionate, and pursuing your career is the correct term to define this. 4 layers of rebuttal here. Throwing in the word career doesn't necessarily equivalent to passion. This is because a career holds a nuanced meaning to suggest that the politician may be primarily motivated by the personal advancement and the financial gain and the power you receive on an individual's account, rather than the genuine commitment to serving the public as a representative. This perception leads to the increased skepticism and the doubt among voters, which enforces a narrative that the politician is more interested in their career rather than in the needs and the answers of their constituents. Second, when politics are seen as a career, trust in elected officials and institutions can fall, and citizens become doubtful of their politicians' intentions and decisions. Finally, when there's an emphasis on career, these career-minded politicians may prioritize party loyalty and electoral success over the effective governance serving the citizens, contributing to the increased partisanship. This creates an us versus them mentality, where this framing can deepen divides between the political factions, making the compromise a lot more difficult. Second rebuttal, they talk about how there are better policies. First, if politicians focus on the career aspect of widening their political landscape, they focus on the term that they are in and they serve, and neglect the sustainable aspect and the long term of their policies and established initiatives. Hence, politicians may prioritize popular but short-term policies to secure votes, neglecting these long-term solutions that require difficult decisions or not may yield immediate benefits. Hence, these career-oriented politicians may prioritize the quick win or the popular policy, rather bettering their reputation as a politician rather than pursuing the long-term solutions that address the society's pressing problems, undermining the sustainable development of the nation or the local region. Third, they talk about the individual motive and how it's greater and will motivate the politician. Then they use a parallel instance of a corporate worker. First, corporate workers are primarily motivated by profit and personal career advancement because they want to move up the social hierarchy that's within the company. However, politicians have a public responsibility to serve their constituents, and the stakes in politics involve the welfare of communities, not just the individual success or corporate profit margins. Lastly, they talk about how there's no incentive to work hard as a politician on an opposition bench. The DPM completely ignores my LO's argument. She told you, as a politician in a high position with high stakes, with authority, you have an incentive to be re-elected and put into office again. If we are charitable and play along with OG's logic that politicians on our world are lazy, then the simple response would be that they wouldn't be re-elected and would lose their power. On both ends, there's no incentive for the corporation, for the politician to be lazy. However, on their end, the politician will search after and go on a pursuit for these individual gains and for their reputation, for their gain. Even if it's not necessarily viewed as a career, they still have an incentive to not be lazy. 3 points to note on opposition bench. Framing politics as a career creates barriers for those who might be interested in the public service and governance, but lack the connections or resources typically associated with the career advancement, leading to a less diverse political landscape. Second, what does this framing lead to? This framing can lead to a political view of positions, objects or goods or commodities to be required, which can further exacerbate issues like campaign financing and lobbying, which dent democratic principles like equal and holistic representation. Finally, when politics is viewed as a career, there might be a stronger emphasis on party loyalty and competition, which already exacerbates an emphasis on a division which inhibits effective governance. First, moving on to clarifications then. For argument, first substantive material. The DPM cannot just claim without the proper backing to prove why democratic values are a mutual benefit. When politicians are viewed as public servants, there is a greater emphasis on working for the collective good rather than the individual gain. This aligns with the democratic ideals that prioritize the welfare of the community over personal ambitions, but the DPM cannot just claim that it's a mutual benefit. Second substantive material. Framing politics as a career only makes this worse because it reinforces the narrative that only professionals with 20 PhDs and poli-sci and law school can be involved in politics, and that's when you place your name on the roster of politicians. What is the impact here? Viewing politics as a career can deter and scare off potential candidates who might not feel equipped to navigate the politician and the political landscape because they believe they lack the necessary connections. Therefore, why is calling out politicians easier on our side? Two reasons why this is true. Firstly, we mobilize the public because we push the narrative that anyone can be involved in politics and there's no entry barrier to that realm, and they are mobilized more to criticize politicians when necessary. And my LOE already told you that there is a world where politics is seen as a career. This happens. Second, there are clear expectations set for politicians. If politics is viewed as a career, I think that there will be low expectations set since people obviously understand the incentive of a politician is to just generate profit and money. On our world where everybody sees politics as something about public service, where you're modeling exemplary behavior and being a representative on behalf of all your constituents and voters, there's already a clear standard set. Politicians should be good social workers, period. Therefore, it's even likely for call-outs and whatnot to exist on our side, and at the end of the day, this higher likelihood of cancel culture is what burdens and incentivizes politicians to be even more good, less lazier, and advocate for what the citizens want. Moving on to team's extension on the public trust and accountability. Mechanization here. If pursuing politics are seen as a career, it may diminish the expectation of accountability to the constituents of their citizens who prioritize and as they are viewed and perceived as someone who prioritizes their career trajectory over the demands and the needs of the public. Framing politicians as public servants establishes these higher ethical standards where serving the public good is paramount. This helps maintain trust in democratic processes and institutions. But note that trust and accountability are interconnected. When politicians act in ways where they are transparent and accountable, it builds public trust. In contrast, when trust is high, citizens are likely to engage with and support their leaders, creating a more positive feedback loop. Ultimately, these high levels of trust and accountability lead to more effective governance, and when citizens believe their leaders are acting in their best interest, they are more likely to support the policies and newly enacted projects, leading to a more responsive and effective political environment. However, when these politicians act on their own individual account of building up their career as a public politician figure, as career-oriented mindsets, they prioritize personal gain over the public service, which erodes trust. They implement short-term policies so they can be re-elected next term rather than focusing on anything else, and framing these politicians as public servants emphasizes the responsibility to their constituents, and this encourages elected officials to be more transparent and accountable for their actions. We give you 4 main points as to the extent we block CEO from winning this debate as well as golf benches. First, how do you preserve democratic values and mobilize council culture with clear standards? Check. Second, why do citizens care on our bench about improving public trust and representation? Check. Third, why does eroded trust happen? When this does happen, we tell you the entirety of the government bench takes loss because they failed to prove why not. Finally, why is there no incentive for politicians to work and represent the citizens on golf benches? Oh, clearly wins this debate, so proud to propose.
Honorable judges and fellow debaters, I'm Zachary, and I'm here as part of the closing government to debate for the stand that politics is characterized as a career instead of a social or public service. In my speech, I'll do a rebuttal and talk about continuous improvement and adaptability, commitment to effective governance and public trust and reliability. While the word career seems to have personal implications, we'll wrap up today's argument with focus on the effects and achievements that come about when politicians focus on their role as a career-driven one. Career as a personal gain seems to be a common point brought up by the proposition. Why is this a bad thing? When someone views their career as a stepping stone for personal gain, they will therefore ensure that they do their best to retain it. In this case, what does this mean? It means that they will have to do their job well and to ensure that people are pleased and believe in their work. It's the same as any other job. If the job is done well, personal gain is achieved, bosses are happy, employees are happy as the job was well done. This is what a career is. One point that they are making is career equals to money. This is not true. Career can also equate to interest, passion, and ambition. Why is it just money? Politicians could have chosen this career as it fulfills their interest, not just for the money. They are therefore trying to say that everyone who pursues a career goes after money and profits and personal gain. There's so much more to a career, such as goals, objective, measurable achievements, and long-term effect. Furthermore, she also keeps stating that people must be well-trained and only professionals will be allowed to be politicians. Then the question is, isn't being a professional a good thing because you need the training? Why would you want an untrained person to take a lead in such an important field? Firstly, Career-oriented politicians are more likely to seek training, feedback, and professional growth opportunities to stay effective and responsive to changing societal needs, just like professionals in other fields. Viewing politics as a career implies a dedication to governance as a profession, where the aim is not just to serve temporarily, but to achieve impactful results. This sense of responsibility encourages a commitment to measurable progress. An example of this is the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. He has taken part in ongoing leadership training, including courses and programs that focus on public speaking, leadership in multicultural societies, and policy development. His commitment to education and training is partly influenced by his background as a teacher and his belief in lifelong learning. This will be beneficial to the country, as the spirit of always learning will help the country move forward as a nation and improve. Secondly, when politicians treat their role as careers, they signal reliability and stability to the public. An example of this is Nelson Mandela. After becoming South Africa's first Black president in 1994, Mandela achieved measurable progress in dismantling apartheid racial segregation policies. His efforts to promote racial reconciliation, increase access to healthcare and education for marginalized communities, laid the groundwork for a democratic South Africa, creating lasting changes in social justice and equality. While these politicians did ensure social service and improvements were met, their focus on their careers as politicians is what led to measurable results. Career progression is based on measurements of progress and before and after numbers. Due to these initiatives brought by these figures in politics, it helps the nation to further better themselves and prune the differences. Thirdly, a career-oriented politician is more likely to be dependable and earn public trust, knowing that their future in politics depends on their reputation and achievement. Many career-oriented politicians are very proactive and present in the community. This helps them to understand and solve many of the problems that the people may be facing. For us, politicians must view it as a job so that they will handle it professionally and ensure that they do their job. Intellect is more important when it comes to governing an entire country as compared to letting emotions run them. Thus, I believe that politics should be characterized as a career.
This debate is about how society is going to characterize politics. Okay, so based on this framing, let's talk about what careers look like. Careers are something that you do for yourself. They're something to get for personal benefit. So therefore, this gives off the connotation that politicians can do whatever the hell they want because it's their own careers. For example, I would care less if I had heard that like an athlete lost their career because it's not my career, right? It has nothing to do with me. And I think that this just gives off a wrong connotation that the things that politicians do don't concern the public directly, when in fact it actually does, okay? Second point of characterization, I think there are infinitely many factors that incentivize politicians to become who they are, right? There are things like prestige, there are things that money that already incentivize politicians to become who they are, but we think that the reason why our side wins is because we create an environment where there are multiple narratives, okay? Because why is this good? Because we give politicians more reasons to become politicians, right? We give many different narratives that say like, hey, you can become a politician because you want this, you can become a politician because you want this, and this in itself is a win because we create more political engagement in the future, okay? Right, and this is kind of a preemption. I assume that the government side would talk about how there will be less politicians on our side, okay? But like we think that we're willing to bite the bullet for less politicians because let's take for example in Sweden, politicians aren't really that rich. They don't really get the money, but they're still really good. They still manage to maintain public societal health, right? Okay, but the reason why career politicians are bad is because the country is divided into multiple different districts with lots of politicians, right? If we were living in a world with career politicians, then it's more likely for these politicians to simply prioritize the benefit of their own districts. Right, but under our side, where we characterize politics as something that we do for the public, politicians are most likely to care for like other districts. For example, if you're living in like Switzerland, but you should be a politician in like one little village A in Switzerland, but you could still care about village B. Okay, that's why we win. So a few rebuttals. So the government talks about political responsibility. They say that like politicians won't have an incentive on our side. But here's the thing. I think that incentives still exist on their side and our side, right? Our side is that they feel the responsibility to serve the public. Their side is maintaining their career, right? The thing that matters here is that how this incentive works out, because their side is more likely for politicians to use their political capital to maintain like their reputation, right? Instead of doing things that actually benefit the public. Okay. They also talk about like things like public reaction and how the public's going to probably hate on politicians. Okay, but still, public is still going to engage with politics, and it's just going to be there's less trust on their side, which I'm going to say in my extensions. And second, opposition says that people are going to rely on like private entities to like do their politics for them. I think this is kind of unmechanized because how can you like rely on the public and private entity to do yourself? Like how can like politics be private in any way possible? I still don't understand this. Okay, so moving on to extensions. I have 3 extensions. First, why is it principally just to frame this as a social service? Second, on how this creates social backlash, and third, on how we prevent a corruption. So first, I think that politics is about the distribution of capital, right? Politics is when the citizens trickle down their individual responsibilities onto the hands of a few individuals, right? Your number one responsibility as a politician is to care about the public, right? So let's take this one step further, devoid of like the mechanism that opening opposition gives you. Okay, let's take this one step further. What does a service mindset look like? This means that feeling the responsibility to benefit society as a whole, rather than the people who actually support them. This means that they'll be more likely to. This means that it fulfills the better value of democracy when they say that we're going to benefit the public. Okay. Second extension on how their side creates social backlash. The mechanism here is that people believe that politicians are self-centered and only prioritize their own benefit. Okay. They feel distrust towards politicians. Okay. There are many impacts to this. First of all, the reason why the trust between politicians and civilians is so important is because it allows them to work together in harmony and produce better political outcomes. For example, to create better public service, I think it'll be way more better for like the citizens to actually trust the government and for the government to trust the citizens to create healthy joint projects and things like that. And second, I think their side creates a low voter turnout because citizens feel less engaged within politics because they feel that the politicians are just doing it for their personal gain, and therefore they are less engaged within politics and they have a low voter turnout. Third impact is that people blame politicians for situations that they cannot change. If politicians can fulfill a promise because of natural circumstances that they cannot control, people just pour pure hate upon these politicians, saying like, "Hey, it's your career. It's your career. You should have done something to solve this problem." This just strengthens the narrative that politicians are power-mongering monsters that prioritize their individual gain over their public services. Last impact here is that the money given to politicians by tax or by the government is going to be used not to improve public circumstances, but rather improve their public image, right? This means that they're probably going to spend their money on more posters than better education because they prioritize what they look like to the public. Okay, sure, I'll take the POI.
But on your side, where politics is characterized as something that's priceless, this means that how passionate the politician is more important than the benefit they can generate. Therefore, even if this person does not generate a lot of profits, as long as he or she loves the society, they can get elected. Then why does politician then on your side have the incentive to not get lazy?
I feel like you have a very arbitrary point on passion because basically we already told you, the opening team already told you that politicians still have passion because they have the responsibility of 1 million people within their hands, right? This means that they're going to be subject to like public backlash if they do wrong. So I think that this is more or less the same on both sides. Okay. First of all, politicians won't be aware of their consequences that their decisions will bring because because politics is framed as a career rather than a public service. They won't be aware of, for example, if they make a bad political decision, they'll probably think more about like, oh, it's bad for me rather than it's bad for the public, right? And second, politicians are just going to dump their responsibilities onto other politicians to escape the public spotlight, right? We can see this happening a lot in things like corporations because many bosses don't want to receive be accountable for the wrongdoings that they did. This means that probably politicians are going to trickle down their responsibilities onto others to prevent like getting subject to social backlash. Okay, and because like people are just going to hate on them, saying that like, hey, you are a professional, do your job, man, and they're just going to try to dump their responsibilities onto others, and the politicians get the mindset of a corporation. Third and last point on how people are just going to use diplomas to justify unjust policies. For example, if politicians make a really bad policy and people are like, hey, like, you didn't do a good job, politicians are probably just going to say, hey, I got a diploma, shut up. Like, I'm the person who knows everything here, right? I'm the person who got the diploma from Harvard, and That's why you should listen to our policy. Okay, for these reasons, proud to oppose.
Greetings to honorable judge and fellow opponents. My name is Benjamin, and as a part of the closing government, regarding the thesis of this house prefers the characterization of politics as a career instead of social or public services, I'm here with the notion that politics indeed should be characterized as a career. Before I begin my main speech, I want to point out invalidities in the opposition's points. The speaker claimed that the politicians are able to whatever they want and prioritize their own profits when the politics are characterized as a career. However, this point is not appropriate because the term career means a profession, a job. There's a job scope. There are objectives to be met. There are tasks to be complete. And why is the focus on, oh, I'm a politician, it's my career, and I can do whatever I want? What kind of job doesn't have accountability? They have to achieve certain things. They have to take their job seriously, else they lose their job. As simple as that. Career being seen as a negative thing simply shows that none of us should have careers then, which makes no sense. We want to make it very clear that a career means you have to do the work the career entails. In the terms of politicians' career, their work is to improve their country's condition. That's the job scope. A career means job, and making politician a job doesn't mean they gain the authority to do anything they want. They are given the job because they are given with a mission that they must accomplish, serving the public, helping people, helping the countries, etc. Yes, this is what we are saying. This is all part of the job scope. Hence, doing it as a career will help the politicians to tick these boxes on their job scope and achieve them one by one. Therefore, the opposition's point does not effectively exhibit why politics should not be characterized as a career. Back to my main speech. The reasons for this is because accountability and professional standards, secondly, long-term planning and stability, and finally, development of expertise. Politicians who show professionalism always exhibit accountability and transparency as they take their careers seriously. For example, as Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern demonstrated accountability through her empathetic leadership style, especially during crises such as Christchurch mosque attacks and the COVID-19 pandemic. By communicating openly with the public, ensuring transparency in decision-making, and frequently holding press conferences to answer questions, she reinforced trust in her government. Another example is Ulysses S. Grant in the United States. Although his presidency was marked by challenges, Ulysses S. Grant was highly regarded for his personal integrity and professional standards. Particularly, yes, sir.
So how is this a responsibility that politicians feel different from our side? Because technically, it's still this fact that you still have the lives of millions of people within your hands. So how does your side change this?
Okay, thank you for your question. And to answer that, yes, it is what I am going to explain throughout my speech now. So yes, so I suggest you wait until I complete my first point. To come back to my speech, and particularly in his commitment to civil rights during Reconstruction, he used federal resources to protect African Americans' rights, and he maintained accountability by rooting out corruption among his staff, even though it was politically challenging. These examples clearly display how characterization of politics as a career can enhance accountability and transparency of politicians. Accountability and transparency is significant for the nation as the constituents must have access to the process of policy implementation, and the politicians must take responsibility for the consequences of the decisions they have made in order for the people to actually benefit from the policy. If the constituents do not know how the decision is made and the politicians avoids the responsibility from the consequences, no subject will be able to resolve the situations from the outcomes of policy enforcement. Also, long-term planning and stability can also be affected by the characterization of politics. Politicians who view their roles as a social or public services are more likely to look for fixes that result in immediate and visible outcomes. However, those who view it as a career think of long-term plans that are professionally managed and sustainable. For example, Lee Kuan Yew, Singapore's founding prime minister, had a vision for transforming Singapore from a small island nation to a globally competitive country. Focusing in the fields of education, public housing, infrastructure, and foreign investment, he aimed to create sustainable growth. These initiatives have lingering benefits, turning Singapore into a major financial. Yes.
Considering how the following point is not a unique contribution of CO, how would you respond to our point that politicians would actually be more short-termist when they put their individual desires and priorities in precedence before social benefit?
Apologies, I could not hear that, so I kindly request you to repeat your question again, please.
Considering how the following point is not a unique contribution of CO, how would you respond to our point that politicians would actually be even more short-termist when they put their individual desires in precedence before social benefit?
Yes, thank you for your question. And to answer your question, I do not believe that the characterization of politics as a career does necessarily lead to short-term planning. For example, so you're claiming that basically if you characterize politics as a social services, then the politicians will prioritize social benefits, and therefore they will more leading to longer long-term plannings. However, this is not true in my opinion, because like I said in my rebuttal, just because you frame politics as a career doesn't mean that it is necessarily only chasing their own benefits, and they still do politics as their job to actually enhance the social society order and for the nation's benefits. So I think, yeah, just because you characterize politics as a career, it will mean that it will actually lead to short-term planning. I hope that answered your question. And to continue with my speech, major financial and trade hub in Asia with high standards of living. Long-term planning grants the nation with the sustainability, long-lasting benefits for the society. Politicians are required long-term planning because short-term solutions do not offer the longevity that nations must possess. If politicians lack the long-term planning, the countries lack stability, which leads to a soon demise of the society. Finally, when politics are perceived as a career rather than public services, politicians are more likely to intensify their expertise in fields such as policy, law, economics, and social issues. Through this, politicians can make more informed and appropriate decisions, which eventually results in better outcomes for the people. Because as the opposing government have explained, careers require continuous development in expertise in order to prove one's competitiveness compared to the others. Politicians are required to enhance their decision-making capabilities to secure their position as a politician. Public services doesn't require expertise, while career is professionalism-based system. Politicians are the head of decision-making nation.
I think the essence of today's debate from the get-go is how society in itself views politics and politicians, right? Regardless of the characterization, given from both opening teams judge, the principle, right, of today's debate is the aftermath, how low voter turnouts, disinterest in politics, and how politicians themselves work to present themselves to the public, right? In these areas, I think Tegu gives the most contributions in today's debate. Few general responses before my clashes. Firstly, passion. I think Tegu responded to the POI that he got pretty well, right? I think passion is rather structured by the public, right? Rather than passion stemming from social recognition and getting personal gains, I think our politicians on our side are rather incentivized to continue through the existence of the public. Why? Social praise is something that exists, right? Donations exist, votes exist. I think voting by its essence is an already big benefit and incentive for politicians to run after and something to always strive for. Secondly, voter turnout. Realize that low voter turnout is literally irreversible. If citizens by themselves start to lose trust in politicians, lose money from useless funding, and don't see any changes in the nation, I think it's logically evident that the voter turnout is going to drastically decrease, right? Tegu tells you that therefore, once politicians are a super social welfare and public-centered emerge, the voter turnout greatly increases in the long run, right? I think people by themselves won't really change that voter turnout if another politician exists on a government model, because they've already lost all that passion that they also wanted. Two clashes here. Firstly, on which side better benefits from the existence of politicians. I think this is the most clashed upon topic in today's debate. Even in the case of opening government, specifically taking a weird stance by saying that politicians are still kept in check because of direct reports to the government. I think Tegu from our side gives the most contributions that are more than enough to win today's debate. First point on quality over quantity. Quality over quantity is something that Tegu newly introduces in today's debate, right? He tells you that even in the worst case scenario where there are like less politicians because like humans by their nature want more attention, more money, and more profit, we still create a better end result compared to teams like OG and CG. I think we will we're more than applicable enough to actually just like bite the bullet here. Regardless of us losing a handful of politicians, I think we rather create a small group of actually quality politicians, right? I think we can rather see a tightly knit group of politicians better over a large group of super self-centered politicians, right? Why? What does Tegu tell you? Firstly, he tells you that politicians, when they're self-centered, usually take the interest of certain districts or cities, right? He tells you that they do so because cities in smaller areas and regions are easier to profit off of because smaller regions are much more easier to interest and hook. He tells you that comparatively, on our side, politicians rather care about the general nation as a whole because they're centered around public and social service. He tells you that this is something that OO fails to recognize and mechanize, and also therefore something that we valuably contribute to the most. Secondly, I think this is the most important principle in today's debate because it makes up the debate, right? Realize that politicians and citizens are in a dual and mutual relationship. Without politicians, citizens cannot be benefited because of a lack of voice, and without citizens, politicians cannot function since they don't have enough support or votes. We win this principle. Secondly, on the point about social backlash, opening opposition didn't recognize this as a big concern, right? I think social backlash takes a pretty big chunk of today's debate compared to government's bench as a whole. The constant mentioning of like check and balancing of politicians, like reporting to the government. Tegu gives you a much more mechanized point on keeping politicians in check on our side if everything fails. He tells you that government can't really be using this logic, right? He tells you that governments are made up of politicians from the get-go. So rather than listening to the reports, I think politicians would rather just ignore reports as they're already a part of the government. Causatively, citizens lose their voice as they begin to doubt themselves as people who don't know much about politics, de-incentivizing them to like contribute to the government. This happens on government's world. What does Tegu tell you about social backlash on our side? On our side, he comparatively mechanizes the point about social backlash, right? He tells you that the distrust is what exists on government side. He tells you that since people think that politicians are super self-centered, they begin to distrust them, right? He tells you that numerous impacts, such as like a lack of social contribution to politics, low voter turnout that drastically impacts political outcome, and much more basically occurs on their side. He contributes the most about social backlash, and I think he's the one that actually mentions society as a stakeholder in politics directly. For these 2 points that he actually contributed to the most about on today's debate, I think we basically take this clash home, essentially winning today's debate. Second clash on which side better gives a voice to our citizens. A, the trickle-down effect. I think Tegu basically gives us the win to our side on this point. Tegu is the only one who talks about the trickle-down effect on our side. So what happens? He tells you and mechanizes that citizens are super keen on helping their politicians, right? He tells you that numerous citizens donate and gives money or funds to politicians for them to make their nation better or to benefit them back. He tells you that comparatively on government's model, politicians rather just hoard all the funds that they get, spend most of it on their campaigns and personal projects, then try and skyrocket their reputation and identity by using their money or funds to boost the knowledge and recognition of their identities. Rather, what happens on our side? Tegu tells you that money given to politicians are rather going to be used to benefit citizens back in the long term because they're centered on public welfare, right? This comes with so many more long-term gains that government bench cannot pay back. We tell you that compared to OO, we give even more elongated and mechanisms and principles on this point. From these contributions, it's clear that we beat government bench. But why do we beat the opening? It's because we are the side that gives you tangible harms, whereas they only give us arbitrary language, such as like distrust or short term. We're the one that actually paints the picture on what's going to happen if we do have politicians that are centered around the public and about social welfare. About the points about corruption, I think he also responds really well to corruption. Politicians won't be aware of the consequences that their decisions bring on government side because all they care about is their career. Politicians are going to dump their responsibilities onto other positions to escape the public spotlight. People are going to hate on them because they're going to feel like they don't know much about politics in an essence. I'll take the POI before I end.
If politicians actively engage in corruption,
Sorry, POIs are out of order.
Okay, sorry.
Politicians are therefore going to use their diplomas to justify unjust policies that they basically can't cover. I've never been born and proud of post. Thank you.